Picture yourself climbing into a steel box that destroys enemy armor by the thousands, but offers you barely a 20% chance of walking away alive. What drove the German military to keep feeding men into this killing machine? The truth runs deeper and more chilling than history books reveal. Why did 4 out of 5 men who entered Germany's most lethal armored weapon never see home again? Picture a machine so terrifying that enemy tank crews spoke its name in hushed, fearful tones. Picture a destroyer that claimed more armored kills than the famous Tiger and Panther tanks put together. Yet for those who operated it, the Sturmgeschütz III offered no protection. It became their rolling tomb. This tale opens not with heroics, but with stark irony. Statistics showed the StuG as World War II's supreme tank destroyer. It eliminated a staggering 30,000 enemy armored vehicles. Its compact profile, precise sighting equipment, and extended barrel transformed Eastern Europe's vast battlefields into killing fields. Time after time, massive Soviet tank formations charged forward in overwhelming numbers. Hidden German guns cut them to pieces. Battle reports described kill counts so extreme they defied belief. To observers, the StuG proved German technical superiority could stop the Soviet war machine. Another story existed beneath those numbers. Behind the statistics sat crews imprisoned in a fatal design flaw. 4 soldiers squeezed into one cramped space. A penetrating shell never killed just one man. It murdered everyone. These were artillery specialists, not tank veterans. They rushed from disaster to disaster. They plugged gaps in crumbling lines. They fought battles already lost. Military leaders called them emergency response units for a collapsing front. The crews had their own name for service: Stahlsarg, steel coffin. Here lies the StuG III contradiction. The war's most effective tank hunter also became the war's most dangerous posting. How did a machine built merely to follow foot soldiers become Germany's primary killer of armor? Simultaneously, how did it become the assignment most likely to end in death? The StuG III story reaches back to Germany's difficult years between world wars. Stripped of heavy weapons by Versailles Treaty restrictions, Germany secretly rebuilt military strength. Strategists examined lessons from the previous conflict and reached one verdict: future combat demanded speed, movement, and firepower that advanced with infantry. Conventional artillery moved too slowly, too awkwardly. Horse-drawn or truck-towed guns could never match the pace of attacking troops. Something revolutionary was needed. A mobile cannon that demolished bunkers, eliminated machine gun positions, and blasted paths through enemy fortifications. The solution was neither tank nor traditional artillery. It would sit low and squat, barely higher than a standing soldier. It would mount a stubby 75mm howitzer in a fixed forward mount. No rotating turret, no traversing gun, just a fighting compartment built onto the proven Panzer III foundation. This basic design was intentional. A lower silhouette allowed concealment behind terrain, lurking in ambush positions, presenting smaller targets. It cost less to manufacture, required less production time, and hid more easily on battlefields. First prototypes emerged in 1937. By 1940, roughly 30 vehicles were combat-ready for the French campaign. Their mission was crystal clear: direct infantry support. During attacks on Maginot Line bunkers and pillboxes, they functioned exactly as planned. They pumped high-explosive rounds into concrete positions, demolished machine gun emplacements, and kept German advances moving. Infantry quickly discovered another benefit. The StuG's minimal height made targeting extremely difficult. Hidden in hedgerows or concealed in ground folds, It became an ambusher's perfect weapon. In those initial days, tank versus tank combat seemed unlikely. The short 75mm howitzer lacked velocity for armor penetration. Against enemy tanks, it proved nearly worthless. This caused no immediate worry. These men were not tankers. They came from artillery units. Crews transferred from Wehrmacht artillery branches, soldiers trained in precision, discipline, and calculated fire. For them, the StuG was simply mobile artillery, a method of bringing firepower closer to advancing infantry. Nothing beyond that. Nobody predicted how rapidly this mission would evolve. German High Command viewed the StuG as a useful experiment, a budget-friendly machine supplementing panzer divisions. For the crews, it remained a novelty, an interesting hybrid that performed adequately in France and the Balkans. The genuine test, the furnace that would reshape its destiny, lay ahead. When Germany struck eastward in summer 1941, the StuG III would encounter enemies unlike any before. In that collision, its identity would transform completely. No longer mere infantry support, but Germany's primary tank killer. Summer 1941 unleashed a hurricane that forever altered the StuG's fate. Operation Barbarossa, history's largest invasion, hurled millions of German troops against the Soviet Union. Initially, Blitzkrieg rolled forward with terrifying momentum. Soon, German spearheads crashed into something unexpected. Across the fields rolled tanks unlike any previously encountered. The Soviet T-34, with angled armor and potent 76mm gun, plus the KV-1 heavy tank, thick-skinned and nearly immune to German shells. Reports poured back. Standard anti-tank weapons failed completely. Panzer divisions that had crushed Western opponents now stood amazed. Their rounds bounced uselessly off Soviet steel. For StuG crews, the challenge proved even worse. Their short, stubby howitzers, designed for bunker busting, barely scratched these new monsters. Repeatedly, guns fired only to watch shells bounce or shatter on hardened plates. The Wehrmacht suddenly confronted crisis. Without changes, German momentum would die on Russia's endless plains. Engineers responded swiftly. They rearmed the StuG with an extended 75mm cannon, basically a modified Pak-40 anti-tank gun. This change revolutionized the vehicle. No longer just assault gun, it became dedicated tank destroyer. Its shells pierced 90mm of armor at 500 meters, sufficient to tear through the celebrated T-34, even challenging heavier opponents. The weapon, once sidelined as infantry support, was reborn as one of Germany's deadliest answers to Soviet armor. The transformation was both mechanical and tactical. StuGs, with their low profiles, became perfect for ambush tactics. Hidden behind ridgelines, nestled in village ruins, or camouflaged in tree lines, they waited for Soviet tanks to approach. When opportunities arose, they struck with devastating accuracy. Unlike tank crews trained for movement and mobile fighting, these men remained artillery specialists at heart. They prized patience, precision, and fire control. Every shot was calculated. Every hit often proved fatal. At Kursk in 1943, the world's largest tank battle, StuG units demonstrated their value. One battalion claimed over 400 Soviet tank kills, while losing fewer than 10 of their own. Such numbers seemed impossible, yet German after-action reports consistently highlighted these low, ungainly machines' effectiveness. They lacked the Tiger's glamour or Panther's fame, but in battle's crucible, they exceeded expectations repeatedly. Crews developed grim respect for their steel companion. They understood it could not protect from every angle. They knew thin sides and roof were vulnerable points, but they also learned that, properly used, The StuG could dominate battlefields. Crews often improvised. They bolted spare track sections to hulls. Some even poured concrete on frontal armor for added protection. It never guaranteed survival, but it provided hope. By 1943, the StuG had become central to German defensive strategy. Production costs remained low, around 70,000 Reichsmarks versus 300,000 for a Tiger. For every Tiger built, 4 StuGs could leave factories. Numbers mattered. As Germany shifted from offense to defense, the StuG became the practical solution. A weapon that could be manufactured quickly, deployed widely, and kill efficiently. But success carried hidden costs. Because the StuG proved so effective, German commanders relied on it increasingly. It was no longer just support weapon. It became the backbone of anti-tank defense. Wherever fronts collapsed, StuGs rushed in. They faced enemy spearheads first. They held lines during retreats last. The machine designed for infantry support was thrust into savior and sacrifice roles. This marked the turning point. The StuG III had abandoned its old identity and embraced a new one. Germany's most crucial frontline tank destroyer. It would claim more kills than any other German armored vehicle. But with success came a curse. The qualities making it invaluable also condemned crews to fight the fiercest battles repeatedly, until few survived to remember. By the war's middle years, the StuG III was no longer experimental, no longer a supporting weapon hidden behind panzer divisions. It had become Germany's armored defense backbone. On Russia's endless steppes, on winter's frozen roads, and later in France's hedgerow country, the StuG's squat silhouette appeared again and again, like a silent predator awaiting prey. Its mission was brutally simple. When Soviet or Allied armor pushed forward, StuG units rushed to threatened sectors. They dug in. They camouflaged behind tree lines or in ruined village debris. They waited. The vehicle's low height, barely 2 meters, was its greatest asset. It could vanish into landscapes. From hidden positions, it ambushed advancing tanks with devastating precision. For enemy crews, the first StuG sign was often gun flash and armor-piercing explosions. This warfare made the StuG terrifyingly effective. Eastern Front reports flowed back. StuG platoons destroying entire T-34 columns. Crews learned predatory fighting. They struck, relocated, struck again. In defensive battles, they anchored German lines. They bought precious time. Infantry came to depend on them. Where StuG stood, lines held. Where absent, panic spread rapidly. German High Command recognized this value. Production accelerated. Factories diverted Panzer III chassis almost exclusively to StuG assembly. By 1943, thousands rolled off production lines. For every expensive Tiger, 4 StuGs could be built. Numbers spoke clearly. Germany's armored future would not be defined by prestige machines, but by these low, boxy, unsung destroyers. Success brought greater demands. The Wehrmacht began using StuG battalions as Feuerwehr. Fire brigades rushed from crisis to crisis. Whenever breakthroughs threatened to split fronts, StuGs deployed at maximum speed to plug gaps. They were not reserved for decisive offensives. They were sent into worst situations repeatedly. Their reputation as tank killers made them indispensable, also expendable. On the Western Front, they appeared in Normandy defending France. Concealed in Bocage country, StuGs ambushed Sherman columns. They knocked out tanks before Americans realized where fire originated. In Italy, they hid among shattered town ruins. They fired from narrow streets. They forced Allied armor to pay dearly for every advance. On the Eastern Front, they were everywhere. Kursk, Kharkov, desperate retreats across Ukraine and Poland, all marked by grim StuG unit efficiency, holding back overwhelming Soviet numbers. Crews developed strange bonds with their machines. They called them lifelines, even knowing each battle might be final. Some painted names on armor, others added crude modifications, track links welded to sides, concrete poured on front plates. These additions barely improved survival odds, but they gave men fragile control feelings. For many, the StuG was both weapon and fragile shield against merciless tides. What truly distinguished them was not just machines, but men behind guns. Artillery specialists by training, they valued accuracy above everything. A StuG crew might wait patiently in silence for hours. They held fire until perfect shots presented themselves. When they fired, they rarely missed. Allied tankers facing them learned quickly. Crossing open ground under hidden StuG observation invited death. By late 1943 into 1944, StuGs deployed on every front where Germany still fought. No longer specialized support vehicles. They were armored defense workhorses, quiet executioners of enemy tanks. But this role's price was steep. The more Germany relied on StuGs, the more crews were thrown into impossible battles. Ordered to hold ground against overwhelming odds, the StuG had become indispensable. It had also become a death sentence. For men sealed inside, deployment no longer meant victory chances. It meant being sent repeatedly into destruction's heart, until only fractions remained. By 1943 and 1944, the StuG III stood at power's height and doom's edge. The machine, beginning as infantry support gun, was now Germany's most feared tank killer. Soviet tankers cursed it. Allied reports warned of its lethality. In one moment, a Sherman could move confidently down French lanes. In the next, flames erupted as hidden StuGs tore through armor. On paper, numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of enemy tanks destroyed, kill ratios defying belief. To outside observers, StuGs seemed invincible. But for men inside, reality was different. Each victory only pulled them deeper into fire. As war tides turned against Germany, StuG units were pushed into most desperate battles. On eastern fronts, they faced endless Soviet offensives. For every T-34 destroyed, another wave advanced. For every successful ambush, counterblows came from flanks. Crews fought, withdrew, fought again until exhaustion consumed them. In city streets, they were ordered into combat they were never built to endure. Without turrets, fixed guns struggled to respond quickly in close quarters. Soviet infantry armed with Molotov cocktails and handheld anti-tank weapons swarmed them. More than once, StuGs burned not because they were outgunned, but because they were cornered, surrounded, and ignited from every side. In the West, patterns repeated. In Normandy, StuGs waited in hedgerows, destroying American Shermans with chilling efficiency. But skies were no longer safe. Allied aircraft prowled above, hunting German armor columns. The StuG's thin roof, barely 10 millimeters of steel, was a death sentence under rocket or bomb attack. Crews learned to fear fighter-bomber sounds more than enemy tank roars. There was no escape. Direct hits from above turned cramped fighting compartments into furnaces. The more effective StuGs became, the more they were abused. German commanders leaned on them as final reliable weapons. They threw battalions into battles where defeat was already certain. They were ordered to hold crossroads to the last shell, to cover retreats until annihilation, to buy time for others at the cost of their own lives. StuG battalions earned grim nicknames. Fire brigades, because they were always sent where flames burned hottest. Results were catastrophic casualty rates. There was something else making tolls even worse. In tanks with turrets, crew members were spread out, commanders in cupolas, drivers in separate positions, loaders and gunners separated by armor bulkheads. In StuGs, all 4 men sat together in single steel boxes. When shells pierced armor, they did not wound one. They slaughtered all. Survivors recalled horror. One moment crews laughed, joked, prepared for another shot. In the next, silence, smoke, and bodies in confined spaces of burning hulls. By war's climax, the StuG had become both hero and executioner. It destroyed more enemy tanks than any other German machine. Yet it consumed lives of men who served it. Out of every 5 crews entering combat, 4 would not survive to see war's end. That was victory's price measured in wrecked Soviet and Allied armor. It was also the reason StuGs earned darker names among their own soldiers. The steel coffin. At its peak, the StuG was unmatched in battlefield impact. But that peak was a razor's edge. Each success dragged crews closer to destruction, until triumphs could no longer outweigh avalanches of losses crashing down upon them. By war's final years, the StuG III legend had been sealed in fire and blood. It was no longer the nimble hunter of 1942. It had become a weary veteran, battered, overused, increasingly obsolete, yet still thrown into battle because Germany had nothing left to give. Factories continued producing StuGs in vast numbers. More than 10,000 had been built by war's end, the most of any German armored vehicle. But numbers told only part of stories. By 1945, only around 1,300 remained in service. The rest had been destroyed, abandoned, or captured. They had fought to last shells, to last fuel drops, until nothing remained but smoking wrecks scattered across Europe. For men inside, conditions grew steadily worse. In early years, StuG crews had been highly trained artillerymen, precise and disciplined. But as losses mounted and manpower dwindled, replacements were rushed in. Young recruits barely out of training. Men who had never fired in combat before being sealed inside steel boxes and sent into fire. Many lacked confidence. Many lacked skill. All lacked hope. Against growing Allied armor might, they were little more than sacrificial offerings. Air power completed nightmares. By 1944, the Luftwaffe could no longer protect front lines. Allied fighter bombers roamed freely. They struck any vehicles daring to move by day. The StuG's roof armor, never designed to resist aerial attack, might as well have been paper. Crews dreaded approaching aircraft howls. They knew survival depended on luck more than skill. Urban combat added to tolls. StuGs were thrown into cities like Warsaw, Budapest, and Berlin. Narrow streets and tall buildings turned every corner into death traps. Soviet infantry, armed with grenades and anti-tank rifles, swarmed them at close range. StuGs caught in such environments had little chance. With fixed guns and slow traverse, they could not react quickly. Flames often engulfed vehicles before single shots could be fired. Then there was the cruel design flaw, the one making casualty rates so devastating. 4 men crammed together in one fighting compartment. No separation, no escape routes. When shells penetrated, results were instant catastrophes. Survivors were rare. More often, all 4 died together, entombed in their machines. Here the nickname whispered among soldiers became bitter truth. The StuG was not just a weapon. It was a coffin on tracks. By late 1944 and 1945, men who fought in StuGs knew what awaited them. They climbed aboard anyway. Some out of duty. Some out of fear of desertion. Some simply because There was no other choice. They fought in hopeless battles, delaying actions, last stands. Many never returned. Statistically, 80% of StuG crews perished, a figure unmatched by any other German army armored branch. Yet even in this dark aftermath, StuGs remained feared. They still destroyed tanks until the very end. On eastern fronts, retreating German forces used them to ambush advancing Soviet columns. In the west, during the Ardennes offensive, StuGs once more claimed their share of Shermans. They remained lethal. But every victory came at prices the Reich could no longer afford. By Berlin's collapse, StuGs littered streets. Their hulls smoldered amid ruins. They had fought to the last. But their stories were written in loss. For every tank they destroyed, they sacrificed a crew. For every battlefield they held, they paid in blood. The StuG III aftermath was not measured in steel or statistics. It was measured in absent men's silence, in the 80% who never came home. Germany's most effective tank killer had also become its most merciless killer of its own. When guns finally fell silent in 1945, the StuG III legacy was carved into history as both triumph and tragedy. On one hand, it was Germany's most successful armored fighting vehicle. More enemy tanks fell to its gun than to mighty Tigers or Panthers combined. Estimates placed the number at 30,000 destroyed, an astonishing record unmatched by any other single vehicle type in the war. In raw effectiveness, the StuG was unrivaled. It was proof that simplicity, low cost, and clever design could be more decisive than prestige machines or engineering marvels. Yet alongside that achievement lay darker truth. The StuG was also the deadliest assignment for its own crews. Of the more than 10,000 vehicles built, barely 1,300 remained when the Reich collapsed. For men inside, survival was rare. 4 out of every 5 who climbed into StuGs never returned. No German armored branch bore heavier losses. No crews faced such relentless sacrificial deployment. Its legacy, therefore, was written not only in Soviet and Allied tank wreckage, but in German soldier blood who became its fuel. For decades, the StuG remained overshadowed in popular memory. Tigers and Panthers, with imposing silhouettes and fearsome reputations, captured imaginations of historians, model makers, and filmmakers. The StuG, low and boxy, seemed too plain to celebrate. But on battlefields, it had been the true workhorse. The silent killer that carried Germany's defensive war weight. It was never glamorous, but it was indispensable. Among surviving veterans, StuG memories are mixed. Some recalled pride in its effectiveness, admiration for its precision, affection for machines that gave them fighting chances. Others remembered only horror of cramped steel compartments, the smell of burning fuel, sudden violence when armor was pierced. To them, StuGs were not saviors, but steel graves. Their success, they knew, had been purchased at their expense. In World War II's broader story, the StuG III remains a paradox. It stands as one of the conflict's most cost-effective and lethal weapons, yet also as a symbol of how desperation consumes men and machines alike. It reminds us that battle victories often come at unbearable prices, that the weapons most effective in war are often ones claiming the most from those who wield them. Today, preserved StuGs sit in museums across Europe. Visitors see squat, unassuming vehicles lacking other tanks' majesty. Few realize that inside plane frames lies the story of tens of thousands of lives. Crews who fought, who killed, and who died. Its legacy is not just military achievement, it is also a warning, a reminder that behind every weapon, no matter how effective, stand men who pay ultimate costs. The StuG III was Germany's deadliest tank killer. It was also Germany's deadliest coffin. Its legacy is both victory and sacrifice. A machine that proved unmatched on battlefields, yet left behind silence deeper than any triumph could ever erase.